most of the Cenozoic era, a massive body of water separated the North American and South American continents. Under the surface of the water, the tectonic plates in Mesoamerica were shifting and moving. The Caribbean plate has moved southwest over the last 15 to 20 million years or so, pressing against a smaller tectonic plate called the Cocos. This southwestern movement of the Caribbean plate collided with the Cocos plate and slipped over it, pushing the Cocos plate beneath it in a process called subduction. This raised the seafloor on the southwestern end of the Caribbean plate, and in some areas the ground even broke through the surface of the water to become dry land. Naturally, the heavy tectonic activity created volcanoes, and these too rose up to become islands. By 15 million years ago, the body of water between the North American and South American continents had been interrupted by a studded chain of volcanic and tectonic islands. Over the next 10 million years, these islands acted like giant geological filters for the water moving between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The currents crashed against them and dropped sediment onto the ocean floor. Mud and sand and biological debris accumulated against the islands until the gaps between them had been filled in with sediment and a continuous land bridge had been formed. This continuous land bridge connected the northern and southern continents, and for the first time in many millions of years, the land-dwelling life from one continent could wander over the land bridge into the other continent. Understand that the terrestrial species native to South America and North America had been isolated on their respective continents for tens if not hundreds of millions of years. As two separate pools of species, they had each evolved along their own pathways, living in dramatically different climates. When the Panama Isthmus was formed, animals and plants were able to spread into the opposite continent in a case of cross-contamination. You can think of this like two distinct petri dishes that have been growing their own bacterial communities for thousands and thousands of generations, and then suddenly a little bridge opens up between them and the bacterial species are able to creep across into the new petri dish. What do you think will happen? What do you think will be the end result for many of these species migrating north or south into a dramatically different climate than the one that they evolved in, than the one that they're used to? This cross-contamination event, which took place at the end of the Cenozoic era in the last 5 to 10 million years, is called the Great American Interchange, or the Great American Biotic Interchange. It involves the mass migration of all kinds of species: ungulate mammals, rodents, snakes, lizards, birds, insects. They all cross the land bridge onto the opposite continent, invading the foreign ecosystems and coming into contact with entirely new weather patterns and temperature cycles. Some of the creatures from North America that migrated south included ungulate lineages like horses, tapir, equids, and deer. Smaller mammals like skunks, bats, cottontail rabbits, raccoons, shrews, tree squirrels, gophers, and mice, as well as a few carnivoran lineages like bears, wolves, otters, weasels, badgers, wolverines, and big cats like jaguars and cougars, as well as medium-sized cats from the genus Leopardus. Other species to come across the land bridge were birds like condors, trogon, and sparrows, and reptiles like snapping turtles, wood turtles, pond turtles, coral snakes, rattlesnakes, and various pit vipers. South American creatures that migrated north include several lineages of ground sloth, several lineages of bats, including vampire bats, birds like hummingbirds, tapaculos, and antbirds, and even the giant terror birds from the family Forus racidea, as well as various species of armadillo and armadillo-like creatures called glyptodonts. Other species that moved from South America north into North America were a few species of capybara, porcupines, opossum, anteater, and various frogs like the hylids, the microhylids, the poison dart frogs, and the leptodactylids. Unfortunately for most of these migrating animals, they found themselves unable to compete in their new habitats, as well as the species that had lived there and been shaped to fit into that habitat by evolutionary forces for millions of years. The species moving south from North America into South America had considerably better luck, as they were moving into warmer regions with more stable climates. Consider that during the winter months, most of North America is covered in snow, and temperatures almost everywhere can be dangerously low. In the high-altitude Rocky Mountain region, the wind and the altitude contribute to bitter winters. In the Great Lakes and the New England region, the humidity makes the winter cold soak straight into your bones. Across the Great Plains, the continental climate and the relatively dry air makes for a savagely cold winter. As they move south into Mexico, the climate gets warmer but remains dry. It's only at the very southern reaches of the North American continent that the climate becomes comfortably tropical. Many of these North American species had experienced these brutal winters, so moving south into a tropical climate offered a lifestyle with much less stress and a lot more food. Species from South America that migrated north were not nearly as lucky, as they were moving from this nice tropical environment into a harsher and more unforgiving climate than the one they're used to. A lot of animals from the Amazon had never known a winter. They'd never seen snow, or even a major seasonal shift for that matter. So migrating north and experiencing North American winters was probably a horrible ordeal for them. Of all of the lineages of ground sloth that moved up into North America, every species that went beyond the safe climates of Mesoamerica went extinct, as did the last of the giant terror birds. As would be expected, this led to a differential success between the groups, where those from North America that migrated south tended to adapt and radiate much more effectively than those species who migrated from South America into the north. Most of South America's large animals that migrated north ended up going extinct shortly afterward, outcompeted by the other inhabitants of the land, or just killed off by the weather. But the smaller animals, particularly the rodents, were actually really successful. The species of rodents that migrated south were even more successful. They radiated out into over 80 different genera in South America's fertile jungles and wetlands, and out across the dry forests and the grassy highlands. It should be noted that while the formation of the Panama Isthmus enabled this great biotic exchange between the continents, it did the exact opposite for the marine life in the oceans. The Panama Isthmus split the body of water separating North and South America in half, creating a dividing line between the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. You can see this geological division reflected in the biology of the marine life in the area. If you look at all the species of animals on the Pacific and the Atlantic sides of the Panama Isthmus, and you study their genetic relationships, the evolutionary lineages that they form, you'll see that there's a lot of sister populations of similar species on both sides of the isthmus, but that they all started diverging in response to an allopatric speciation event that totally cut them off from the rest of their population. Obviously, this allopatric speciation event was the gradual accumulation of sediment that led to the emergence of a continuous land bridge. The Panama Isthmus and the Great American Interchange demonstrate how biology is tightly linked to and influenced by geography. Where the geography contains animals in a particular region, their evolution diverges along its own evolutionary path. But when geography opens up a corridor into a new area, with new habitats and new resources and new climates, life will inevitably spread through that corridor to see what lies beyond. On a continental scale, populations will move in and splash out across a landscape, finding the most habitable areas and clinging there for life, while adapting to or dying off entirely from areas that are too inhospitable. In the case of the Great American Interchange, life from the north moved south and spread into the South American jungles with relative ease, struggling against little else besides the local species that also competed for food and shelter. Life from the south moved north, and they spread across much of North America, although this life struggled and was ultimately beaten back by both competition with the local species and the brutal, unforgiving seasonal climates.